means love of place, and bibliophilia means love of books. So this talks about how we translated the love of our home harbour into our book. Next.
I see that you are sharing, not me.
I can't move it, right?
Nothing I can do.
Well, then we can't have the show then. Remote control. What? Oh, right. Okay. I don't know how to do that. Okay, so Martin Marks has lived in Lyon-Solent and I've lived in Southsea for 50 years. Martin served many years in the Royal Navy as Deputy Head of Haslar Hospital and also as restorer of steam Pennis 199. I'm a founder member of the Portsmouth Society, the Hampshire Building Preservation Trust, the Wimmering Manor Trust, the Portsmouth Royal Dockyard Historical Trust, the Portsmouth WEA Local History Group, and of course the Naval Dockyards Society. 3 periods of lockdown concentrated all our lives into our immediate surroundings, so we've had plenty of time to explore them and learn new things about them and to finish the book. Next. No, I can't move it, so you're going to have to keep doing it, right? How do I move it on? Right. Our focus is the legacy of historic defence sites around Portsmouth Harbour. We believe that the development of defence heritage tourism on both sides of the harbour is an international exemplar of both the challenges and the successful reuse of defence heritage. Next. Can we have next, please?
Me too.
How do we go to it?
But you went up there, didn't you?
It doesn't work.
Yes, it does.
Oh, it's working now. Right. I learned to do research at Portsmouth Polytechnic and Oxford Brookes universities, local history, historic conservation, and for my PhD in 2002, White Holes, decision-making in disposal of Ministry of Defence heritage sites. Buildings are historic documents just as much as printed material and manuscripts are. Both are vital to our understanding. I've published articles and spoken at conferences in Venice, Greece, Serbia, Finland, and Cagliari, and to promote cross-cultural exchange in the important but underreported process of finding new uses for historic ex-military, naval, and air force sites. In 2002, I initiated a series of conferences, Defence Sites, Heritage and Future. The first was in the Royal Beach Hotel in Southsea, the next in Venice Arsenale, and the next in Alicante in Spain. The precursor to our new book was one I edited with Professor Sama Bagain, Sustainable Regeneration of Former Military Sites, published by Routledge in 2016. This new book is its locally focused successor because the harbour contains all the challenges and some excellent solutions on how to reuse redundant defence heritage. All this experience has added to my knowledge and understanding of how ex-defence sites are transformed to new civilian life. The book's dedicated to 2 inspiring people, both of whom taught geography at Portsmouth Polytechnic. They had distinguished careers which greatly enlarged our understanding of the historical, social, economic and environmental forces that shape Portsmouth Harbour. The first is Professor Ray Riley, my mentor, inspiration and long-term friend. Here he is in Boathouse 4 and at Milton Locks. He edited the Portsmouth Society's book, Maritime City, and was a co-author of the Geography of Defence, the first book to analyse the effect of defence establishments on a local area, such as Portsmouth. The other is Professor Sir Gregory Ashworth, world expert on heritage and heritage tourism. He was knighted by Queen Beatrix of the Netherlands in recognition of his research and his support of young researchers. This is his diagram from his book, War and the City, which shows 2 possible routes for defence sites once they're no longer needed, demolition or preservation, which I used in the book. Our book wouldn't have been possible without many people's dedication to our home harbour. Here are just some of them. In particular, I'd like to mention Councillor Freddie Emery-Wallace, leader of Hampshire County Council for 20 years, whose Defence of the Realm project first identified the term defence heritage as a theme for tourism in Hampshire. Wayne Cowcroft, Historic England's expert on historic defence sites and helpful mentor on how they might be reused. Jonathan Code, English Heritage, scholar, historian, author of many important books about British dockyards. Peter Goodship, Naval Base Property Trust Chief Executive from 1985, whose achievements I celebrate later in the lecture. John Stedman, Portsmouth City Archivist, doyen of Portsmouth's local history, who arranged this talk. John Sadden, Archivist of Portsmouth Grammar School, whose local history books with their excellent historic photographs bring Gosport and Portsmouth's history vividly to life. Denise Beck, inspirational architect whose specialised design skills have brought many defence heritage sites to life, including Spitbank Fort and the Hot Walls in Portsmouth. And my husband, Dean, who's sitting here beside me, he was probably the first architectural student to study the dockyard buildings in a thesis, which is a historic document in its own right. We share a passionate interest in historic buildings and cities. Here's the structure of today's lecture. Why did we write the book? How did we do it? What has been achieved in giving new life to ex-defence sites around the harbour? What was disappointing? How did we get the book published? And what's happened since early November when the book went to the printers in Belfast, and what's still to come? Why did we write the book? It's to ask a fundamental question: who gains and who loses in defence site disposals and redevelopments? We believe that the current UK state property disposal system, dominated by HM Treasury, which asks for maximisation of capital receipts, sale to the highest bidder, doesn't benefit ex-defence dominated communities or economies. We're not the only people to question this system and to campaign for a more locally friendly one. Portsmouth's Bill Sargent Trust paid for 2 research reports by Julian Dobson, which found that post-defence experience on both sides of the harbour damaged local people's chances once the troops left. Other countries, including the United States, puts reuse into the hands of locals. They're helped by a special fund from the Department of Defence, the Office of Economic Adjustment, which I think, as far as I know, is unique, is part of the defence. American defence communities also have their own Washington lobby. At the end of this talk, I will set out the campaign to change the UK system. What research methods did we use? Both Martin and I are active participants in the process, which has transformed Portsmouth Harbour's defence sites into civilian land uses. Oral history is vital. We wanted to listen to unheard voices. Memories change over time. Understanding people's motives is vital to understanding. The local sense of identity, as you know, in their defence areas is very strong. We identify with the defence of the country and the armed forces. Sword Beach was there. It was where my father was almost fatally wounded on D-Day and brought back to Haslar Hospital. Because of the harbour's national role, we're witnesses to national events. People in Portsmouth will never forget seeing the fleet depart for the Falklands after our dockyard worker friends had been working 18 hours a day, and also to see the ships returned, holed with crews lost. The harbour also has left us significant industrial archaeology. What are the regeneration challenges to reusing defence sites? Density is one. How can we find new uses for all the 12 forts around the harbour? Diversity is another. You'll see from this sample how many different historic defence sites have been surplus to requirements in the last 25 years. As these examples show, the southeast region has more defence sites than all the others. Many are significant listed buildings. What should happen to them? Contamination is another challenge which Portsmouth faced excavating the glory hole at Eastney, full of dockyard waste, as does the City Council as the new owners of Tipner. The Portsmouth Naval Base Property Trust are developing Priddy's Hard, an ordnance yard with years of contamination. Important questions to ask are who influences what happens when they're reused and how are the new uses achieved? Maps are essential to the process. Jonathan Code's magisterial books about the Royal Dockyards are essential sources for their history and development over time. His scholarly text is matched by the skill of cartographers in maps that show the extents of the harbour's defences. Portsmouth Polytechnic's Atlas of Portsmouth and geographical essays published in the 1970s added considerably to our local knowledge. Dr. Mike Bateman clarified the origin of the pioneering book, The Geography of Defence, as the proceedings of the first National Geographical Conference to examine the shaping effect of national defence on our home area. These maps from Ray Riley's paper in the book are drawn by Portsmouth Polytechnic's brilliant cartographers to demonstrate the dominance of defence land use in Portsmouth in 1860 and its gradual civilian reuse between 1910 and 1986. Bill Johnson and Rosemary Shearer were just two of them. Town and country planning, of course, is map-based also. Portsmouth and Gosport's conservation officers continued this process of mapping releases of Ministry of Defence land and took it forward into the 21st century with the designation of conservation areas. Fieldwork, photography and drawings are essential research tools linked to other sources. We use documentation in archives, histories, planning records and publications by the MOD. We found that Wikipedia entries cannot always be relied on. Photography is absolutely essential, and these are record photographs. The two top pictures record a major loss. Number 3 ship shop, the largest structure on the harbour until the new ship halls and fleet headquarters were built. Their 1845 cast iron roof by Messrs. Baker and Son of Lambeth predated the more famous railway station sheds. Bottom left is the granite gun base, which stood in the centre of the parade ground of Mill Barracks, Portsea, now a university campus. World War II rubble was dumped in Long Curtain Moat and excavated in the 1970s when the moat walls were restored by Dean Clark, City Historic Building architect at the time. We're very lucky that Garrick Palmer recorded HMS Vernon's transformation into gun wharfs, shopping and leisure facilities, flats and houses. Dave Fricker also recorded the loss of archaeology at Vernon, as well as this barge at Priddy's Hard. Both local authorities commissioned record shots of their defence sites. Before and after shots are useful. Here's the Grade 1 block mills before and after re-roofing. The Dockyard's 240-ton crane was once a symbol of the city. It was unsentimentally cut up when it became obsolete. Portsmouth Royal Dockyard Historical Trust owns a precious album of women working in Portsmouth Dockyard in World War I. It would be interesting to know who the photographer was. Recording the site before redevelopment is important too. In March this year, I explored the seaward edges of Tipner West, now named Lennox Point. Driven by high government housing targets, Portsmouth City Council proposed to build 3,500 homes on this west part of the site and 700 east of the motorway. As I've said, land reclamation is controversial because the head of Portsmouth Harbour has a special protection status for wildlife, including migrating birds feeding on the tidal flats. Development cannot go ahead unless a similar habitat is provided elsewhere. I don't know how. And building on tidal flats would release significant greenhouse gases. So as we've told you, Anne and I are both members of the new Historic Heritage Forum. And as I said earlier, Richard Holmes, who's writing a history of the Pounds family, saw the interior of the magazines this week, and they're not in a good state. Drawings by architects and engineers are essential to our understanding of the harbour's past and its buildings and structures and proposals for their futures. Some of these are historical. The engineers' drawings for the construction of Boathouse 4, which at the bottom left, and Dean's measured drawing of the ropery, which actually is a historic document in its own right. Subsequently, as you know, the ropery was eviscerated, to quote Jonathan Code. Mick Morris converted the Royal Marines Church in Henderson Road, Eastney, into 7 houses by laterally slicing across the aisle. That's what's in the centre there. Cartoons are useful too in campaigns. The cartoon by Mick Morris showed just how big the famous architects Herzog and de Moeren Stadium would have been, completely filling the Hard. This is the promotional drawing. Luckily, the Queen's Harbour Master stepped in, pointed out that his staff would not be able to see the ships entering or leaving the harbour. Defence buildings don't always stay in their original position. Queen Victoria's railway shelter was loaded onto rollers and moved away to free the harbour frontage from naval operations, while Lion Gate, which once spanned Queen Street, was reassembled at the base of the Semaphore Tower. What are the achievements that the book celebrates? The importance of volunteers cannot be overemphasised, and of course we are all volunteers in the Dockyards Society. Their knowledge and energy so often the key to the survival and often to the restoration and interpretation of the harbour's defence heritage. They also make our visits enjoyable and informative. There are many positive examples of volunteers' input around the harbour, including Gosport's Diving Museum at Brown Dam Battery, which now has a national and even international recognition, hence the loan of the Dean diving helmet from the Science Museum. It was set up and is still run by volunteers, many of them professional divers. The Naval Base Property Trust recognised how important the skilled dockyard craftspeople are to the dockyard heritage area. Members of the Portsmouth Royal Dockyard Historical Trust, the skilled shipwrights, repair the Trust's historic boat collection and enliven craft demonstrations in Boathouse 4. The World War I Remembrance Centre restored the decayed Bastion 6 in Hilsea Lines to house their collection of World War I memorabilia. Speaking of volunteers, the Long Run Art Centre number 6 in Boathouse 6, run by film enthusiasts, adds immeasurably to our cultural life by keeping us up to date with art house films from around the world. We do hope it's not lost when the building is converted for the Royal Marines Man to play there. However, there are also examples where volunteers' expertise and the way they bring sites alive has been less valued. HMS Warrior no longer has guides in Victoria's sailor's uniform to give scholarly answers to visitors' questions. Historians at Priddy's Hard had to reapply for their jobs at the Explosion Museum, perhaps in response to health and safety issues. And this also seems to have happened at Fort Nelson, where the Palmerston Fort Society was founded. They spent years physically clearing the fort of rubble and trees and bushes in the moat. Dean was one of them, and they still meet there. But the expert guides are gone. The generational clash between young museology-trained museum curators and older, expert, often emotionally invested volunteers is all too common. The outstanding achievement of regeneration around the harbour has to be the Portsmouth Naval Base Property Trusts. It was underfunded for the task it was set by the government in 1985. Its exemplary restoration and repurposing of the historic buildings within the heritage area and its commissioning of impressive new architecture reflects the expertise of its board and also of Peter Goodship as its chief executive. Training in traditional boat building and repair in Boathouse 4 is a brilliant educational initiative, offering continuity with the skills of generations of dockyard workers and also bringing the tourist experience alive. The Trust restored and adapted the historic buildings in the Naval Base Property Trust and also added new ones. Our first dockyard chapter outlines the development of the Trust and the National Museum of the Royal Navy, and also two proposals that didn't materialise, Project Prime and the bid to inscribe Portsmouth Harbour onto the World Heritage List. Our second dockyard chapter describes the restoration and conversion of the buildings and of the historic ships and boats. It's, as I said, that its patronage of nationally important architects reflects the expertise within the board, notably Professor Sir Colin Stansfield-Smith. Cormac Jamison Pritchard restored number 6, adding the exterior staircase for access to the lettable top floor, but surveying mistakes on ground conditions led to a significant cost escalation. The Mary Rose Museum, designed by Wilkinson Eyre, is an extraordinary addition to Portsmouth's architectural canon, cocooning the remains of the ship in an oyster shell structure. The Porter's Garden, also created and maintained by volunteers, is a lovely place to visit on our way to the cinema. We'd like to welcome this opportunity, use this opportunity to welcome the Trust's new Chief Executive, Hannah Prowse. The achievements of the Naval Base Property Trust continue across the harbour at Priddy's Hard, a deeply contaminated site, with the Explosion Museum of the National Museum of the Royal Navy as major occupier and developer Elite Homes as partners. Their new houses in the middle right, inserted within the blast walls, are a promise of more interesting architecture to come. Another major achievement is the conversion of Spitbank Fort and No Man's Land forts to luxury event venues, funded by Mike Clare, who made his money in dream beds. Since they're in the middle of the sea, they're pretty difficult building sites. Denise Beck was the award-winning architect. She specialises in defence heritage buildings. Deservedly popular are Denise's Hot Wall Studios in Broad Street, Old Portsmouth. Her ingenious conversion of the cold, damp casemates into inviting and well-used artist studios and the popular Canteen Cafe with its startling seaward balcony joined to the round tower has justly won several architectural awards. As Denise says, sustainable regeneration encourages the development of social enterprise and placemaking. The restoration and conversion of Royal Clarence Yard and St George Barracks in Gosport are also major achievements. Rob Harper, Gosport Borough Council's Conservation Officer, and Dr. David Evans researched the history of the Victualling Yard, identifying the rare artificers' workshops before the site was sold to Berkeley Homes, ensuring that its history was thoroughly understood. Barclays learnt from the opposition to the clearance of most of HMS Vernon by organising community planning events, where locals are invited to say what they would like to see happen to Royal Clarence Yard. As far as best practice in public consultation is concerned, this is a much better and ultimately more sustainable process than consult and ignore, which is what usually happens. Admirably, what's more, both the yard and the adjoining part of St George Barracks are open to public access, unlike Hassler Hospital, of which more later. Working closely with Historic England, Gosport now has 2 heritage action zones with the themes of defence heritage and the High Street. The Historic England Chief Executive said, "By investing in Gosport via the Heritage Action Zone, we are using the rich historic environment as an anchor to support the town's regeneration to benefit the local community. Many of Gosport's defence sites will be open for Heritage Open Days, and Martin Marks will be on duty." Other barracks too have been converted to private flats. Local developers Gudgeons were the first to recognise Eastney Barracks' potential. National developer Redrow finished the job. As you know, the Royal Marines Museum in the Officers' Mess was closed in 2017 and the site was put up for sale. The Yomper had to stay where it is because of public outcry. The new owner of the Officers' Mess is a local who was born in New Road. He plans to convert it into a 5-star hotel. The university has replaced defence as a major employer, as well as occupying former defence land. You can see this from this map of 1945, before the university began to colonise it. But Portsmouth Polytechnic, as it was, added many fine buildings to the sites of both Portsmouth and Portsea's ramparts, as well as repurposing some of them, the Nuffield Officers Club and Mildam Barracks. The Nuffield and Anglesey buildings are due to be demolished in the estate master plan. The Octagon of 1941, bottom left, paid for by South African mayors to entertain the troops, has already gone for the new sports facility, bottom right. Schools and colleges, too, have reused defence buildings. The Portsmouth Grammar School was the first institution to seize the opportunity of buildings and land cleared of the harbour's defences. St Vincent Comprehensive School opened in 1974, but only the frontage buildings were saved by Dean Clark of Hampshire Historic Buildings Bureau. In place of the barrack blocks, bottom right, new teaching blocks were built. It's now a 6th form college for 14 to 19-year-olds. Bay House, designed by Decimus Burton in 1838, and later the property of the Admiralty, is now the centre of Gosport's other 6th form college. Fort Cumberland's developing new community is a model of how our defence heritage might be restored. Historic England's experts on the historic environment and archaeology and their laboratory for restoring historic artefacts share the fort with makers, artists, the Fort Gin distillery and veterans facilities to help them recover from war trauma. Dennis Beck's master plan for the fort shows this mix of uses. Key to the process are the leases which enable the occupants to restore their premises, a creative way to regenerate the fort. I will return to Isambard Kingdom Brunel's Bridge, which has been in store there for 20 years since it was transferred from Paddington at the end of the lecture, when discussing what hasn't happened yet. What else do we owe the military? Open space. As fortifications and military lines have become obsolete, they have become much valued and much needed open space. Portsmouth's particularly short of public open space. A new country park is planned north of Portsea Island. To illustrate the complexity of reuse and problems caused by changes of mind by the MOD, Southwark House and its D-Day map and the historic landscape is an example. It's a very important historic site with the Southwark Priory and the landscape and lake. The owner of the Southwark estate, Mark Thistlethwaite, asked for the return of Southwark House once the MOD announced that it was leaving the site and building a new college at Worthy Down, north of Winchester. He was entitled to do this because of the Critchell Down rules, where the previous owner had to be offered first refusal. He bought back the lake and ground and opened them to the public, though we do have to dodge golf balls as we walk around it because it's been a golf course for some time. But the planned university sports and forensic campus didn't happen because the MOD now say they intend to stay for another 10 years. What have been the major disappointments? Haslar Hospital is at the top of the list. The importance of the hospital is reflected in 3 major initiatives before it closed. In 1999, the Haslar Task Force organised a march where 20,000 people demonstrated, asking that the hospital remain open. About 100,000 people signed a petition delivered to 10 Downing Street. Gosport Borough Council and Hampshire County Council entirely supported the campaign, and there were questions in the House of Commons. The borough's conservation officer made sure that the site's historic significance was thoroughly understood and protected. In 2008, Prince Charles's Regeneration Trust held an inquiry by design of participants who together came up with a master plan. In 2009, the planned Veterans Village for members of the armed services and merchant marine with links to Chelsea Hospital was supported out by well worked out reuse plans for all the buildings and finance from the City of London. Links with the Royal Hospital Chelsea were developed, and there was royal support from Prince Charles and Prince William. But instead, in late 2009, the MOD's Defence Estates, chaired by Admiral Lawrence, sold the hospital to developers for the low price of 3.5 million, with no conditions to ensure that these visions would be realised. You have to be a pretty wealthy veteran to buy an apartment there, and the site is a gated community with no public access. Another major disappointment is what happened to HMS Vernon Gun Wharf. Most of the archaeology and historic structures on the site were cleared in the redevelopment. It was the centrepiece of the Millennium Renaissance of Portsmouth Harbour project, but too much of the conservation area was destroyed when it was developed by Berkeley Homes, except for the few buildings that were listed or scheduled. The Admiralty Experimental Diving Unit of 1921 had already been pulled down by the Navy. The 1709 seawall was encased within the underground car park. Many of the surviving buildings could have been reused. However, the 1790s office block survives as a pub, and the cupola and north wing of the Vulcan block, derelict for 50 years, was restored by Michael Underwood of Headley Green Tree Partnership, who added a replica south wing. Another disappointment was that the better located and designed Millennium Tower, designed by Robin Partington of Foster and Partners, was not built. But the Spinnaker, which was years late, cost the developers and Portsmouth City Council taxpayers was. Furthermore, public access to the residential part of Gun Wharf is increasingly being cut off, with dire results for the Aspects Gallery. Another major disappointment was the Millennium Commission's decision to exclude the proposed Dockyard Museum from the Naval Base Property Trust bid to celebrate the millennium. Block Mills would be an ideal location to explore the history of the dockyard and its workforce. Extension of the heritage area to include Block Mills, Number 1 Basin and Docks 1 to 5 was very close to happening in 2018. A lease was drafted and the level of endowment was agreed. But it was cancelled by the MOD over perceived security threats. The Portsmouth Royal Dockyard Historical Trust collection is at present in Storehouse 10, where knowledgeable researchers, including many ex-dockyard employees, work on preserving it, but it's not publicly accessible. Chatham and Devonport have their dockyard museums, but Portsmouth still doesn't. We'd like to see celebration of the achievement of the dockyard workforce to balance the National Museum of the Royal Navy. The Navy comes and goes, but I feel that the dockyard workers are the real spirit of Portsmouth and Gosport. hence our terrace, rows and rows of terraced houses where they lived. If Block Mills was within the heritage area as part of the Portsmouth Naval Base Property Trust remit, the Trust could apply for grants to convert it into a dockyard museum. Another major disappointment was the cancellation of 6 years' work preparing a bid to inscribe Portsmouth Harbour from Ryde to Portsdown Hill and the Queen's Harbour Master area onto the World Heritage List. Our bid was cancelled by the leader of Portsmouth City Council because he believed it would inhibit inward investment. If you look at Liverpool, the opposite is true. It's booming. How did we publish the book? Local history publishers worked to a set formula and length, which our book didn't fit. The alternative was to self-publish and pay for it. I owe everything to Dan Bernard and Gail Baird of Tricorn Books. They set up as Tricorn Books to publish my Tricorn book, which you can see there, and 300 books later, they've been going strong ever since. Gail and Dan were immensely patient with my many revisions and changes of mind, spending whole weekends checking the text. We also value the excellence of their design. What's been the effect of COVID and lockdown? The closure of the Dockyard Heritage Area for long periods and the loss of income to the Naval Base Property Trust, the National Museum of the Royal Navy and other museums in the area has been disastrous for their finances. Both the Trust and the museum had to be bailed out by government grants. The other elephant in the room is the threat of rising sea levels. We've seen the damage done to our sea defences at Long Curtain Moat and the Haslar seawall. With the building up of Hamilton Bank in connection with the dredging for the supercarriers, Haslar seawall is even more vulnerable to storm damage. If this breach is not substantially repaired, the Blockhouse Peninsula might be undermined, with drastic results for the harbour's future. Naval Dockyards Society Chris Donithorne told me that in his discussions with senior dockyard management and the DIO about this, he would like to see more open lines of harbour governance and planning for the future, and I certainly endorse that. A welcome development is that there's been a change of heart about the repair of the Dockyard Historic Estate by the Naval Base Commander. Portsmouth, as the home port of the two supercarriers, has led to defence industry's interest in locating inside the yard. This would hopefully lead to the repair and reuse of the buildings currently on historic buildings at risk, Historic England's building at risk register. The parade or long row of 1718, damaged in conversion to offices in the 1980s, has recently been extensively restored, and the boundary of the heritage area might be moved to add the old Naval Academy, which could then be converted into a hotel. What's to come? Did the book change anything? We await Historic England's decision on whether the King's Bastion is a good place to reassemble Brunel's Paddington Bridge along the bottom there. Tipner West redevelopment includes the future of the historic magazines, and as we've said, Anne and I are members of the new Tipner Heritage Forum. Gosport's Haslar Barracks, which is just beyond the hospital, has been put up for sale by the Ministry of Justice. Gosport's Heritage Action Zones already leading to a substantial grant for repair of the police barracks at HMS Hornet. The new Sustainable Conservation Trust was formed to take on difficult cases. It was launched on the 18th of April at the Round Tower. The Royal Marines Museum, as I've said, is to be converted to a 5-star hotel. And of course, on Monday, the Dockyard Heritage area is to reopen. As I said at the beginning, we believe that Portsmouth Harbour, especially the development of defence heritage tourism, is an international exemplar both of the challenges and experiences of reuse. We need a new way of selling publicly owned land. Several bodies are working on the case. The Hampshire Building Preservation Trust held a seminar examining experience of its complex transition to civilian life, which came up with recommendations to the MOD. Those recommendations are at the end of the book, along with a research agenda identifying other countries' best practice. And as Anne and I have said, these are being taken up by a new group, Futures for Defence Heritage, which includes architects and surveyors who are working on historic defence sites in this area, working with academics in the University School of Architecture to make these two objectives happen. Portsmouth Harbour will continue to evolve, as it has done for a millennia. If you want to buy the book, just send me an email. Thank you very much.